Okay, I've got 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, so we're going to go ahead and get the webinar started. I'm sure we'll still have a few more people that'll be joining us in the next couple of minutes, but we are so pleased today to have with us Hillary Isebrands from the Federal Highway Resource Center in Lakewood, Colorado. She's part of their safety and design team. And Hillary is a national roundabouts expert, and she's going to be presenting for those of you on the webinar on roundabouts on the local road network. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Hillary.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with the Ohio LTAP and the folks within Ohio today. And I hope, Victoria, if something drops or you can't hear me or the slides aren't catching up, please just let me know. I'll have you help me out with that on your end. But the intent here is to go about an hour. The idea here is to talk about some issues and some topics related to the local road network, as well as new and exciting things that are happening in the world of the roundabouts. And I'm going to pause every few slides and encourage you all to contribute in the chat pod on a couple of questions that I have, and encourage comments. I believe Victoria will be recording this session, and again, we'll be able to hopefully go back and look at some of the conversation that happens in the chat pod, as well as provide you all a copy of this presentation at the end, or as a follow-up after this webinar. So I guess it's afternoon for you all. It's still morning for me here in Colorado. But again, I encourage you to put questions or comments in the chat pod as I go along, and I will be pausing, like I said, about every 10 minutes to try to engage you all as much as possible to get some dialogue going, even though this is a webinar. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about is just the role that locals have had on the roundabout network across the United States. And in many states, and even in your state, in Ohio, the locals have really led the way in many cases in terms of getting out there and getting, the first roundabout in a region, or the first roundabout in a county. And these are just some pictures from across the country of projects that have been driven by local agencies, whether it's a town, it's a county, it's a city. And oftentimes, as you all know, even though you might lead a particular project, there's other stakeholders that are engaged in the project, either through funding or through a review process or through an approval process. So we know that there's a lot of folks that have touched the projects, even though the locals might own and operate a particular roundabout, or the state might own and operate a particular roundabout. We know that it takes a village to get a roundabout usually on the ground, and it takes a team to get a good roundabout design in progress, and then ultimately constructed. So again, just a smattering of photos from across the country that I've collected over the years that illustrates the diversity of roundabouts, as well as the complexity and then the beauty, if I can say that, the beauty of roundabouts in a lot of our areas as well. So now let's dial down a little bit further into Ohio. So this is actually a screenshot from the Kittleson Roundabout database. They've been doing this database for a long time. They just recently updated it with the recent International Roundabout Conference that was held in May of this year in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And just to give you an idea of and again, this does not include all modern roundabouts, but it's to the best of that group's ability of coming up with identifying roundabouts across the country. So you can see there that obviously the cluster in the Columbus area is the most significant in Ohio. And if we take a little bit closer look, you can see there as we drill down into seeing Hilliard and Dublin, of course, we've got some other clusters that are starting to develop in that greater metro area. If we look beyond that, we also have Lucas County. If you go to, there's actually a link there to the Lucas County website that actually talks about their existing and proposed roundabouts up there in that area. If you look at the Ohio DOT roundabout website, you'll see some fact sheets and some information on some of the roundabout projects that are being pursued as DOT projects. So again, those are some links that if you haven't had the opportunity to check out what's going on in your backyard, they have some great information and some great links, not only from a project perspective, but again, some lessons learned and other resources that might be available to you. I find that it seems like on a regular basis, I'm always identifying or locating another resource related to roundabouts. And so again, there's a nice little map up there of Lucas County in terms of what they're tackling related to roundabouts. So today, what I'm primarily going to talk to you about is just some of these emerging topics and noteworthy practices that are going on here in the U.S. primarily. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mini roundabouts and compact roundabouts. I'm going to talk more about pedestrian and bicycle facilities. Also looking at flipping on that from more of an urban perspective to more of a rural perspective, looking at high-speed roadways. I know that there's several roundabouts in Ohio that have high-speed approaches, and then just looking at some noteworthy practices as it relates to capacity models, some education pieces, and some other emerging topics that we have. And then, of course, resources. We're always digging for good resources and new resources, so hopefully maybe there's something on that list that is new and informative to you all. And then last but not least, an opportunity for us to have some back and forth and some Q&A on roundabouts. So first off, the mini and compact roundabouts. So I'll start with mini roundabouts. We probably have well over 24 mini roundabouts in the United States, and I'll get a little bit more to the details of what actually defines a mini roundabout in a moment. But we do have mini roundabouts in rural as well as urban and suburban areas. Typically, the posted speed in advance of these is less than 35 miles per hour, and the truck volumes tend to be fairly low at these locations. In terms of traffic volumes, again, typically the traffic volumes are less than 15,000 AEDT. So let's look at some examples. So on the right side of your screen, what you'll see is just a schematic. It comes out of NCHRP 672, which is the Roundabout Informational Guide, just reminding everyone that a mini roundabout is different than a neighborhood traffic calming circle. A mini roundabout has a fully mountable center island. Typically, it will have a striped or a mountable splitter island in advance, and the intent of the mini roundabout is to construct it within the existing right-of-way and the existing curb lines if at all possible. So you've got minimizing the impact that you have in the area. The size range is typically between 45 and 90 feet in diameter. I would say most of the most recent mini roundabouts have been closer to probably the 75 and 90 foot range in terms of that ICD. And just a reminder, when we're talking about the diameter, I'm talking about from outside here to outside here in terms of that distance or for that diameter. So the photos on the left, this happens to be from Shakopee, Minnesota, so outside of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, a project that was right next to or near some schools. As you can see, it was a four-way stop there on the left, and it was converted to a mini roundabout. They did do, on the crossroad there, they did actually do a lane drop in advance because it was a four-lane, pretty much local collector that went through some neighborhood areas and some residential areas, and they were able to actually drop a lane at the intersections in advance, so you ended up with just a single lane roundabout. There's a really nice web page in Shakopee, the city of Shakopee, that talks a little bit about the whole story of this mini roundabout. So if you're ever wondering, gosh, do we have roundabouts near schools? Yes, we have lots of roundabouts near schools, and here's an example of a mini roundabout. And this one was designed so that the buses would not have to traverse over the multiple center island. Again, it is mountable, but the larger trucks would have to in this area. Again, primarily residential. You can see there that you've got a nice picture in the wintertime where you can actually see that the snow defines those raised areas very nicely. On the bottom left, Ypsilanti, Michigan, and this is in Washington County, Michigan. There was actually 3 intersections and 2 that kind of created a triangle, and 2 of the 3 intersections were converted to mini roundabouts. Again, you can see the before and after image there, not too far from also from a high school. So you had a lot of activity. You get that peaking neighborhood traffic, the peaking school traffic that we're all familiar with in terms of sometimes that 5-minute peak at a 4-way stop can really cause a lot of problems for us. So again, we're talking about fairly low volumes, but those peak periods can really put a damper on someone's drive to school in the morning. And then last but not least, a more of an urban example of the mini roundabout. This happens to be in Baltimore, Maryland. And this one is actually near Johns Hopkins University at this location. And this is a location that was a 2-way stop control location where they had a lot of pedestrian activity, and they really primarily used the mini roundabout as a traffic calming measure in this particular area. So we're seeing more and more agencies, even state DOTs. So the mini roundabouts typically were on the local road network, and now we see several DOTs that are jumping into the mini roundabout venue, if I can call it that, looking at how it might solve capacity issues primarily at 4-way stop locations. So again, I think every day I hear about a new mini roundabout that someone is proposing or looking at across the country. Moving forward to talk a little bit about compact, and then I'll take some time to talk a little, or to come back and we can chat about mini roundabouts again in terms of questions that you might have. So those compact roundabouts tend to be between the 90 feet and 120 feet in terms of the diameter. In the original Federal Highways 2000 guide that was, roundabout guide that was published in 2000, there was an urban compact category for roundabouts. And that was dropped with the NCHRP 672, or the 2nd edition of the roundabout guide. And I really think that it's important that we do remember that roundabouts we can have a roundabout in that 90 to 120 foot that can still accommodate buses, that can still accommodate fire trucks, as well as semi vehicles. We just have to know that the speeds are definitely going to be a lot slower, but it does allow us a lot of flexibility. The image you're looking at there, that's actually Kings Beach, California. It's on the top side or the north side of Lake Tahoe. There are 2 small roundabouts on that corridor. It happens to be a state highway. However, the project was driven by Placer County. It was really driven by the locals in terms of getting people out of their cars and being a part of that community, using the beach that's there, and as well as slowing traffic down. So this was actually a part of a road diet project. It used to be actually a pretty ugly 5-lane cross-section through this entire community, and they were able to do a pretty expensive road diet project that's about 1 mile to 1.5 miles long through their really their business district or their main street area in that community. The bottom photo is also from that same roundabout, but just illustrating that, working with the importance, if you are going to do a compact design, making sure that we're always working with our stakeholders, our maintenance folks, our law enforcement folks, the fire department, to make sure that they're able to traverse that in a safe manner to get through. And in this case, the smaller the roundabout gets, the there's a limit in terms of the turning radius on a plow. So if you want the truck aprons plow, you have to think about that in terms of what that might look like for winter maintenance. Photo on the upper right and then the image below belong to a project in Lakewood, Colorado, not too far from the new light rail that is in Denver, Colorado. This is a bit of an art district. They did consider a mini roundabout at this location, but then ultimately went with the urban compact design. Reason being is this is, again, they've got a little bit of an art district here. They wanted the ability to dress up the center island. You can see there, it actually looks like a puzzle piece on the bottom image. I also want to point out that on the bottom photo, if you see all those red doors on the left, that's actually a fire station. So there's a fire station right there, right next to the compact roundabout design there. The city worked very closely, again, with the fire department to make sure that they could get in and out. In fact, they do have a signal there to stop vehicles. Just off to the side of the screen, you can actually see the two signal heads, and that is specifically for when emergency vehicles are coming in and out of that. They can go ahead and trigger that signal so they are allowed to get out of the garage and to where they need to be. So I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to check the chat pod and for some questions. And then hopefully, if I can get it to work, I'm going to try to show you all a video of a before and after of a mini roundabout in Lake Stevens, Washington. Okay, and I'm not seeing. Okay, so Michael Dolek is saying that currently building a single lane, 3-leg roundabout, 90% complete. Okay, good. Yeah, and so if folks that are on the webinar, if you have roundabouts that you want people to know about, please go ahead and post those in the chat pod. And I do have some time to talk about that a little bit. So I'm going to make an attempt here to bring up a video. If it doesn't work, we'll just keep on moving. But I'm going to do my best to bring up a before and after video of a mini roundabout in Lake Stevens. And Victoria, I'm going to ask you if you can see a video running of a 3-way intersection.
Yep, it's going.
Okay, so this is just a look. It's always a little gloomy there in the Pacific Northwest. Of the 3-way stop, you can see it's adjacent to an arterial there, but a lot of queuing was occurring. There's a lot of shopping off to the left of this photo. You can see the pedestrians walking. So again, this was where Lake Stevens, Washington was really looking for a solution to a capacity issue that they were having at this particular location. A lot of delays. You can see the queue is building there, both on the left side of the screen as well as the top side of the screen coming into the intersection. Okay, so I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to show you what it looks like as a mini roundabout. So again, a little bit different angle, but it's the same location, about the same time of day. And the reason it's hard to tell sometimes when you go from a stop control to a roundabout to tell if it's the same amount of traffic. But just take a look at that arterial next to the mini roundabout, and you'll see that it is about the same amount of traffic that we were looking at before, but the traffic is moving very smoothly. You can see this is a low frills, very low frills mini roundabout. They constructed it with their own forces. They're relying on the pavement marking. So again, this is more ideal in locations that aren't going to have, in the northern climates that are going to have snow, because obviously we know the markings would get potentially covered up. So you have to look at different countermeasures on how you might address that. But very much a low frills type of design, but it functions very well. And Lake Stevens continues to look at locations to install mini roundabouts as well as compact roundabouts to help them alleviate some of their congestion issues that they have. So I don't see any new questions in the chat pod related to mini roundabouts and compact designs. But again, I would say that the most common place that agencies are looking to this is really where they're replacing a 3-way stop, a 4-way stop, and in some cases 2-way stops. But the most common is the operational issues. They're trying to solve operational issues with those all-way stop conditions. And the mini roundabout usually can fit very nicely into a smaller right-of-way. And there's definitely some variations in how you can do the design. You can dress it up significantly, but you can also do something very low cost like Stevens did here. All right, so I'll just keep moving. So let's talk a little bit more about pedestrians and bicycle facilities at roundabouts and what maybe new things are coming to light related to pedestrian and bicycle facilities at roundabouts. So pedestrian performance metrics, so things that we need to be thinking about, right? So we need to be thinking about conflicts as it relates to peds and bikes and vehicles, or even bikes and peds. Accessibility. We know, many of us, that if you've been around in the roundabout community or have looked at roundabouts as an option, we know that the U.S. Access Board related to two-lane roundabouts has provided some draft guidance on how to address two-lane roundabouts. So that's an ongoing issue that we are working through, and there's some new information that I will share with you related to accessibility, the U.S. Access Board related to roundabouts. And again, we're talking primarily about the multi-lane type designs. We know that speed can make a big difference with pedestrians and bikes, and that speed differential obviously is an important piece that we want to be looking at as it relates to pedestrian performance. Yielding rates, how well are drivers yielding to pedestrians at roundabouts? Now we could ask that same question, how well are our drivers yielding to pedestrians elsewhere in our community, whether it's someone doing a right turn on red or someone at a mid-block crossing. How well are we handling the education, if you will, in terms of yielding rates for pedestrians at crosswalks or at crossings? Sight distance, making sure that pedestrians you're able to see pedestrians, and this can come into play in terms of sometimes with landscaping and other features that we need to be conscious of. Delay for pedestrians. For those of you that are traffic engineers or deal with the traffic and the highway capacity manual, we know that in the 2010 highway capacity manual that there was the multimodal level of service. So we're becoming, as we should have before, but now it's in writing, being more conscious about the delay that we impose on other modes of transportation, pedestrian, bicycles, transit, and not just be so auto-centric. So what does that look like as it relates to roundabouts? And then the whole connectivity piece, having those crosswalks at locations where you're considering the origin and destination and you're considering the users and how they might be navigating through the intersection. So a lot of these, it makes no difference if it's a roundabout or it's a signal or it's a stop control or an interchange, but it allows us the opportunity to have that conversation and dialogue on how well we're doing for other modes of transportation. The last image I'm going to show you here is, it actually comes from Federal Highways, some a study that Federal Highways did related to looking at accessibility at multi-lane roundabouts. And what you see here is the degree of curve. So degree of curve, for those geometric folks on the call, has to do with your radius that you have, and as your degree of curve goes up, your radius actually is a little smaller. Your free flow speed for vehicles going through the intersection tend to be lower. The yielding rates tend to go up, and interventions tend to go down. And so if you think of those four categories, if you will, and how it relates to how we design and how it's safe for pedestrians, it's something that we can look at our design, and when we're doing a peer review or we're doing an initial design, we can think about all those elements. We can think about, what is my radius on my intersection? You can think about how fast can people turn right or go through or go left through that intersection, or how fast are they coming out of the roundabout? And then we can look at, your design in terms of, is the driver able to see or recognize where the pedestrians are crossing and see them so they're able to react to that pedestrian crossing? And then the interventions piece, of course, had to do with the particular research that this came out of, and that was looking at accessibility. And with that is if you have a blind or sight impaired pedestrian, As part of a research project, we always have someone there to intervene, but that is a metric that we look at in terms of intervening if they were maybe stepping into traffic. And so that's something that we always think about, and if you read the research or the latest research in this area, that is something that oftentimes comes up. So here are, I would say, in terms of publications and accessibility, these are the most recent ones that we have. Of course, NCHRP 674 has been around since 2010. It was done about the same time as the Roundabout second edition came out. But more recently, Federal Highways, I mentioned there with that diagram, really looked at the evaluation of rectangular rapid flash beacons at multi-lane roundabouts. That was published in 2015. And then published in January of 2017 was actually an update or a continuation of that NCHRP 674, published as NCHRP 834, which really is a guidebook. So it's a guidebook to help us as practitioners make sure that we are making every consideration possible related to a safe and accessible pedestrian crossing at our roundabouts. And in this case, it also applies to channelized turn lanes. And I'm just showing you there, those are the research reports, so that's what they look like. So if you Google that, you will find it. There is a web-only document, so it's not published, there's not a hard copy of it, and it is a supplement and gives some additional information to NCHRP 834. I just wanted to make you aware of it. It does have a different number on it. It's web document 222. But whether you're looking at accessibility or you're just looking to have the best design as it relates to pedestrians, these are great documents to dig into and take a look at. They talk about raised crosswalks and pedestrian hybrid beacons and rectangular rapid flash beacons and other features like geometry and how that can affect and traffic volume and how that can affect the accessibility of roundabouts. So I'm just stepping back a little bit, in terms of just sharing with you those adaptations of roundabouts as it pertains to accessibility. This comes from the original NCHRP 672 project, where they installed a temporary raised crosswalk as well as a temporary pedestrian hybrid beacon in Golden, Colorado on Golden Road. And so just a reminder of in terms of what those results were, you really saw very similar results as it pertained to interventions at the pedestrian hybrid beacon and the raised crosswalk, which is very interesting because they're very different strategies in terms of accessibility and having pedestrians cross the roadway. If you think about it a little bit, what does a raised crosswalk do to us as drivers? Well, we recognize that there's a bump in the road. Oftentimes we will pull our foot off the pedal or put our foot on the brake. We react to those typically as drivers, or the average driver typically will react to a raised crosswalk. It also allows the pedestrian to be very visible within the roadway. And of course, the pedestrian hybrid beacon does have the red signal, so that is indicating to us that we are actually stopping. You can see at right below the average ped delay per approach. It was a little bit more with the raised crosswalk versus the pedestrian hybrid beacon. However, again, that intervention rate was really, it was 0 is what was recorded in those studies. So really important information as we consider multi-lane roundabouts in the future and making sure that we have an accessible design for all of our users across the country. I'm going to shift gears now to bicycles in terms of taking the lane. I think one of the things that is very, very important, whether you have a shared lane in advance of a roundabout, whether you have a actual bike lane that's marked, or you have a shoulder, no matter how the bicyclist is approaching the roundabout in the roadway, it's really important that we communicate what we want that bicyclist to do. Now, an advanced bicyclist or a road bicyclist or a confident bicyclist may take the lane all the way through the roundabout, and that's totally acceptable. We also have the option to use a bike lane. Okay, the example we're showing here actually has the person in the roadway, and notice how they're a little bit off to the side there in that lane, and as they get closer, now here they are on the approach, they're at the yield line, they're actually more taking the lane. Okay, they're physically being present in that lane, and then as they drive through again, they're present in that lane, and that's really, really important. So cars don't push the bicyclist to the side or try to pass that bicyclist in that lane. As it relates to safety, I don't know if you all are aware of the statistics that we have, or what we, to the best of our ability, what we know related to ped and bike safety at roundabouts. To our knowledge, to Federal Highway's knowledge, we do not have a pedestrian fatality at a modern roundabout. And again, we're talking about 4,500 probably roundabouts in the U.S. to date that we can count for modern roundabouts. There has been one bicyclist fatality. It did occur about a couple of years ago. It was in California. It was a really kind of a freak accident, quite honestly, and that's really where I became more aware of making sure that bicyclists are physically take the lane. So either the bicyclist isn't trying to pass a vehicle in the roundabout, or the vehicle's not trying to pass the bicyclist in one lane in the roundabout. So important to communicate that to our stakeholders, as well as we speak to communities about particular projects. There is an emerging, I guess, practice, I would say, outside of roundabouts. We hear about cycle tracks. We hear about, now we've got the green bike lanes. We hear about protected intersections, where you're trying to separate all the modes within the intersection to have safe passage of the intersection. So this is an example from Lafayette, California. This actually is now on the ground, but they were looking at these, the transition areas as you're trying to get bicyclists from a bike lane through the roundabout, or taking the PED facilities on the outside. So this is just an example, and I'm seeing more and more of these as agencies. This happens, again, from Lafayette, California. More and more agencies looking to how they're communicating to the bicyclist as well as the driver on where they want them to merge or weave in advance of the roundabout to get in the correct lane, make sure that bicyclists are very visible, and try to have an understanding. So California as a whole is looking at options for how they're transitioning bike lanes through intersections. They do pretty heavily rely on the green pavement marking. So I just provided this example as food for thought in terms of this is really an emerging practice as we transition from bike lanes, shoulders, shared lanes into not only intersections in general, but in this case, of course, roundabouts. So I've got a couple of videos again that I'm going to share, and then we can open it up for questions in the chat pod as well. All right, so one more time here. I'm going to pop up on the left. So hopefully you can see this. This is a rectangular rapid flash beacon on a 3-lane approach to a modern roundabout. Victoria, can you see that? Okay, so this is a 3-lane. It's actually a left only on the left, a through, and then a right only on this particular approach. Notice the additional markings in advance of the crosswalk here. This roundabout has been in place for almost 20 years now, actually. This is one of our original roundabouts in the U.S. This is in Avon, Colorado. They have gone through a variation of treatments at this location related. They've had raised crosswalks. They've had just the PED crossing signs, and now they have stuck with the rectangular rapid flash beacon with the additional markings there. I'm going to show you, here's an image here. This is actually just some road bikers coming through the little peloton, as I call it, coming through a roundabout in a small little community. Here, it is a multi-lane roundabout, and notice how the marking's gone, okay? So in Colorado in the spring, we don't have pavement marking, and so it disappears. But you notice that they're traversing, they make their way from the shoulder into the lane and go through. They're pretty much traveling the same speed as any vehicles going through there at that location. It's a very common route where you've got a lot of road bikers riding along the rivers in Colorado. The main road there is a state highway. However, it does act as part of a main street of a small community at this location. So education is important, but one of the best ways to educate yourself is to go out either and drive it, ride it, walk it, or go out and observe others that are driving, walking, and biking in your community. So any questions here? I'm not seeing any, I don't think. Oh, there's some. Now I'm seeing some questions. So I'll get back to these. I'll come back to these at the end. Now that I'm seeing, I'm going to see if there's any right here about the Avon crosswalk. I thought the shark's teeth was the appropriate warning marking. So the shark's teeth are for, you're correct, are for the, actually it's, shark's teeth are for a yield line. So depending, if you look at the METCD, there are some options. Some, and this is a local road, and some people do, these markings are shown for raised crosswalks in the METCD. So you just want to look closely what is in the METCD or other guidance that's out there. I know NACDO has some different guidance that has come out. It may not necessarily be in the METCD, but it's something to look towards and get you know, a permission or approval to go ahead with some of these different styles of markings to draw attention to that crossing. I'm going to see what else we have. A couple more questions. All right, so I'll come back to, okay, what options are available for accommodating blind persons across roundabouts? Current designs aren't blind friendly. So again, what's out there right now, what's in the PROAG, the Public Rights of Way Accessibility Guidance draft, was basically a pedestrian hybrid beacon, a traffic signal or a PED signal, or an approved equivalent. Since that language came out, and there was a lot of responses, the U.S. Access Board got a lot of responses. The U.S. Access Board worked with Federal Highways, with the Transportation Research Board, Roundabouts Committee, as well as the Institute of Transportation Engineers, to all work together to come to what are the options that are available and acceptable as it pertains to accessibility. And so that's where you saw the advancement of NCHRP 674, which did do that evaluation on the rectangular rapid flash beacon, as well as the pedestrian hybrid beacon and the raised crosswalk. I shared the results comparing the raised crosswalk and the pedestrian hybrid beacon there on the same, actually on the same roundabout, just on different approaches. And based on what we heard, the Transportation Research Board Roundabout Committee heard in January from the U.S. Access Board was that they are pursuing in the final language all of those options. Remember, documentation is important. Working with your approving partners is very important, and working with your community in terms of what is their preference, reaching out to your accessibility community and your advocacy groups to find out what is working for them and what is not working for them as it might pertain to a roundabout or just in general with intersections, and having that conversation and documenting on your projects. The PROAG is not final yet, but we do encourage folks to reach out and look at this research that is available. Again, I provided those references for you, and make that a part of your conversation and your project teams with your approving agencies, as well as your community as you move forward with this. Once it is absolute final and it's approved by the Department of Justice and the Department of Transportation, we'll have clear guidance, I would say, but right now we're kind of in this gray area still. Unfortunately, we've been here for quite some time, but we do have new research, and that's the important piece to take away, is that we have more information to make more informed decisions about our projects when we're looking at 2- and 3-lane type designs. All right, I'm going to keep moving, and then we can come back to questions again. All right. All right, so let's look at the rural spectrum here on some high-speed approaches. I'm going to show some examples up here. The upper left is actually Black Hawk County. This was a Black Hawk County, Iowa project where they had a lot of crash problems. It's a very rural, actually rural, very farming, but it's just outside a large community, Waterloo, Iowa. So there was a decent amount of traffic. You've got a lot of trucks and tractors and all sorts of vehicles, you know, 55-mile-an-hour approaches. So it's really important for those details in terms of those longer splitter islands, having good lighting and conspicuity of that center island. This project, on the, again, the upper left, did reduce those fatal and injury crashes. This was a problem for this county for a very long time, and the roundabout was able to solve their problems. They did include one of the farmers there that farms the quadrants of that intersection. He was part of the design team because they wanted to make sure that the design was appropriate for the equipment that was going to be going through there. So they had to think carefully about the selection of their curb. They had to think carefully about where they placed light poles and signs to make sure that they could get the equipment through there properly. So even though that never comes up as the design vehicle on a project like this, at the end of the day, that farming equipment ultimately was the design vehicle, and that's just doing our due diligence and making sure we're working with our partners as we design our projects. The upper the upper right photo, that is from Larimer County, Colorado. So again, notice the longer splitter islands. You've got higher speeds coming in. You're trying to achieve that conspicuity. You can see there's actually some landscaping that they put in here. In this particular case, this is a location where you might think, well, why did they do landscaping? How did they get it to take off? They agreed with that project that they actually would water the landscaping for a year. They used native plants and native trees, and if after a year they didn't take off, then it is what it is. But they did agree as part of that project to water it for the first year to establish the landscaping, to try to have those features for beauty, but also for that conspicuity as you're entering into the intersection area. The bottom right photo is actually a project in the town of Truckee, California. Truckee, California has been very instrumental in getting roundabouts in place there off of Interstate 80. They have really a plan in many cases to remove a lot of their signals and replace them with roundabouts in their area. They do have to work with their partners in Caltrans because I-80 does cut through this area, but they're really trying to use roundabouts as best they can to improve safety issues, operational issues, and they actually have a lot of community development that goes on that actually people are excited about roundabouts and feel like roundabouts are the right alternative when it comes to intersections in that particular community. So there's, I would say, probably well over 100, maybe even approaching 150 roundabouts on the system that do have high-speed approaches. And when I say high-speed, I should have qualified this earlier, 45, 55, 65-mile-an-hour approaches in advance of the roundabouts. And then we're using geometric features as well as signing, marking, and lighting to make drivers aware that there is an intersection ahead. Now, the reason I grabbed this photo, and I know it's zoomed out quite a bit, so I just put a circle. This is actually two county roads, the intersection of two county roads in Washington County, Minnesota. Actually, one of the first really roundabouts in Minnesota. A project, you actually have a school. You can see just in the southeast quadrant, I'll call it, of that intersection of the roundabout. There's actually a school. There's a lot of ball fields. There's a lot going on there. So neighborhoods, residents, up basically to the north side of that main road. But then the other interesting thing is if you actually look at as that was developed, look at all the other roundabouts that actually went in to that that site plan for that complex. It's more of a sports complex that was put adjacent to a school. This particular, the main roadway, so the intersection up at the white circle there, that main roadway, they actually do have two of the crossings are ped under crossings. So they did go ahead and they did, it's a good example of using the tying to the neighborhoods, tying to the infrastructure and the connectivity, but they actually did use underpasses to get the pedestrians under two of the legs at that particular location. So I'm going to bring up more video here, and then I'll go to the chat pod. Okay, so this is an intersection. I'm showing this. This is actually off of Interstate 5. These are hook ramps off of Interstate 5 in San Juan Capistrano, California. This is an offset, pretty much an offset intersection. You can see it's kind of awkward, and just watch the cars. It's like, do I stop? Do I start? Whose turn is it? They had some new development going in this area. The community, they had a developer working with the city of San Juan Capistrano trying to identify a solution for this location. long story short, single lane roundabout was the ultimate design for that area that they felt improved safety short-term as well as long-term. The roundabout actually cost a little bit more in this case, and the developer was willing to pay that extra cost for construction because they knew that the long-term benefits in terms of operations and safety were actually going to be better for that developer and what was going to be constructed from a site perspective in the future. And Caltrans was very supportive. And this was also the first roundabout on the state system in this district of California. So it was definitely an interesting project. And again, I applaud the teamwork, the team effort that the local jurisdiction, San Juan Capistrano, the consultants, the developer, and Caltrans and Federal Highways, the role that they played in really getting this project completed. All right, I'm going to go to the chat pod here and see what we've got going on there. Okay, so there's a question. I'm going to go back to the ped bike question. I'm wondering if the statistics you provided about peds and bike fatalities in the U.S. are available in writing. So yes, at the very end, the Federal Highways studies that were done, we do have that documented in our it's called TOPR 34, TOPR 34, and I'm going to list that at the very end, and I will point that out. You can find that on Federal Highways website. We did have that. We are aware overall, besides peds and bikes, so I gave you those statistics. You will also see in that document where we look at fatalities and injuries at roundabouts that there is probably about 50 known fatalities at modern roundabouts in the U.S. right now. Again, to the best of our ability, working with state DOTs and other partners to identify when fatal crashes occur at roundabouts. I don't plan on going into the details here, but that study does give you a full workup of the fatal crashes that have occurred on roundabouts. I will tell you that unfortunately a majority of those have to do with high speeds, impaired driving, which is an unfortunate piece to that story. I think there was one other question that I'll take now. The initial slide had a photo of a roundabout in a very close proximity to a railroad crossing. Is there guidance for these situations? I would say there's not guidance. I believe you're referring to the one in Salt Lake City. It was on that photo collage. That one does have, it's really interesting. Bill Baranowski has some good stories about that one in terms of how they use the gates and where they place the crossbuck and the gates. That is light rail. There are dozens of roundabouts near railroad crossings. I have seen several agencies that have used micro-simulation software, so getting information about how many trains come through there, how many cars come through, when do the trains come through, how long are the trains, how much time does it take the trains to get through, and actually using micro-simulation to help them paint that picture of roundabouts near railroad crossing, whether it's a light rail or it is a you've got UP Railroad or whatever. But I've seen folks creatively use that to help them tell the story. And then, of course, working very closely with whoever's owning and operating the rail. At Waco, Texas, I believe it's Waco, has a track going right through a roundabout as well. And so if there's someone that needs, we actually have, I believe I have a list of most of the roundabouts that have rails next to them. If you're looking for that, please reach out to me and we can take care of that. Okay, so moving right along, let's look at some of the noteworthy practices. So let's look at some of the other things that are going on related to roundabouts. I'm going to cover, again, capacity. I'm going to look at temporary roundabouts. I'll give you a couple of examples of temporary roundabouts that some local agencies have used, and then the education pieces that we have. So hopefully you're all aware that the 6th edition of the Highway Capacity Manual that was published at the end of 2016 does have an update to the roundabout capacity equations. So this actually came from a study that Federal Highways did. Federal Highways actually also published the equations as well as the data and the information, all the background to the research and the data collection was really to calibrate the 2010 Highway Capacity Manual. Most of that data was collected in the early to mid 2000s, and then the new data that contributed to the 6th edition of the Highway Capacity Manual was data that was collected in 2013, 2014. So 10 years later, we were able to add additional observations and information to those capacity models. So on the left, you will see how Federal Highways published, this is the single lane equation. So you see all the dots there, that's all the data that was collected out in the field. The black dotted dashed line, or so the dotted line there on the bottom, that was HCM 2010. Okay, so that's what was published in HCM 2010. The red line is the exponential model that was fit into the new data, and then the blue line was a linear regression model that was fit into the data. So you've got the two different regression models that we have that were utilized to help inform how the HCM moved forward. They did end up publishing the red line, which was the exponential model. So what I want you to take away from this is if you look to the right, you'll see what's published in the Highway Capacity Manual, so Exhibit 22-6. So what you see there, and that's a combination of single lane and multi-lane, and you have lines, right, which represent equations that we use in whether you're using highway capacity software or you're using through other tools that you have to estimate your capacity. But really the story is the data. And I want you to understand that even though there is an average line, that red line, there's a lot of other information out there. There's more to the story, and the more to the story is all that data. Where do you lie? Where does Ohio lie? Maybe in the Columbus area, you've got higher than average capacity. Maybe in some of the areas where you do not have a lot of roundabouts, maybe you're below that red line. Where's Carmel, Indiana? Carmel, Indiana, well, we know where they're at because we used quite a bit of their data in here. We know that they're above that red line, okay? So it's important to understand that when we're using and doing the capacity analysis, to do a sensitivity analysis, how far above or how far are you off? If you're off with your numbers for your traffic projections 20 years from now, if you're off 5 or 10% above or below, where does that put you? Do you have a failure? Is there a leg that completely fails if you're above or below that red line? And this is, again, the information helps us make more informed decisions about our projects. And that is the important piece, is to be more informed about when you make certain decisions, one decision over another, perhaps. And I'm also just going to remind everyone with the Highway Capacity Manual that really this is meant for single lane and 2-lane roundabouts. This is not meant for 3-lane roundabouts. There is some guidance on how you look at right turn lanes and adding on a right turn lane to a 2-lane roundabout, but be very cautious and know the limitations of not only the Highway Capacity Manual, but know the limitations of the other tools that you're using as it relates to capacity. And don't be afraid to use more than one tool. I think that that's always a good way to help us, again, make those informed decisions. So moving away from the capacity piece, I just want to share with you San Joaquin County. This is actually in California. This is a project, if you look at the upper left photo, it was a project that they were going to basically widen the road there. They were going to add a 4th leg. They were expecting huge development. This is in the early 2000s. So if you think back to the early 2000s, prior to 2007, what was going on? Everything was growing. People were investing in infrastructure. We had a lot going on. The economy was great. And then all of a sudden, what happened? Right? We had the crash. And so interestingly enough, this particular project on the right there, it kind of got caught up in that. And so they expanded the road. The folks that were working on the projects actually didn't have the money to fully do the signalized intersection. The development that was going in wasn't going in. So they opted for this temporary roundabout. And so you can see it there. On the bottom left is a picture from Google Street View. So it's not pretty at all. You can see that they've got some of the barrier in there, and they've got basically, it looks like flower pots with a one-way sign. But it works. And San Joaquin County says that this has been an amazing project for the community to see how efficient roundabouts can be. Now the traffic it's not operating at the traffic that they thought would be operating now, but in fact the community now has said we don't want this signal, so they're looking now, there's plans for this to be expanded to a 2-lane roundabout as the new developments go in. So this was originally a signalized project, and they're actually going to use the right-of-way. They're going to do a multi-lane roundabout and add some more ped infrastructure as the development goes in. This temporary roundabout has been in place for 10 years. Here's another example from the same county. This is actually a project that's ongoing right now. You can see in the upper left, they actually have a bridge widening project coming in. And during the bridge construction, they really needed some help with the traffic. So they came up with a concept, they call it the beanabout. And they came up with this concept that they could have a temporary roundabout, that they could actually kind of change its shape as the construction phasing went on. So it's almost like an amoeba, like it starts to change as different phases of the construction of the bridges go on. Again, it's been successful. The people that work and use this intersection, it went from an all-way stop to the roundabout. They've actually said, hey, can we keep the roundabout? Unfortunately, that's not in the plans. It will be a signalized intersection with the capacity expansion of the bridge itself. But it is serving a function. It's not pretty. You can see they've got basically that raised the raised curb there to help delineate the center island as well as the splitter islands. But it's working. We've also seen temporary roundabouts being used in other construction projects across the country where you pull the signal out, you immediately go to a roundabout to help facilitate the movement through the project. So now switching gears to education, videos and websites. So if you haven't seen the Roundabout Outreach and Education Toolbox, there's a lot of good case studies. Federal Highways put that together several years ago, but we do continue to populate that with new things as they come about. There's a lot of states that have great videos. I think the bottom left, that's from the Wisconsin DOT video on roundabouts. The image up top is actually from Glen Falls, New York. I gave a link there on the bottom. The YouTube link is actually for a testimonial. Someone went out with a camera after that project went in. You had a lot of business owners and property owners that said, this isn't going to work. We know it's not going to work, or we said it wasn't going to work, and now they said that it's actually an amazing intersection. It's transformed their downtown. Another look here, Mythbusters, actually, if you can still find it, they do have a comparison of an all-way stop versus a traffic signal versus a law enforcement moving people through the intersection. In fact, the roundabout did win from the Mythbusters perspective. If you haven't seen it, you have a great video. The City of Dublin has a really neat video, Drive Like a Dubliner, with several young kids, probably, I'm going to guess, probably from 5 to 8 years old, that talk about how to drive a roundabout. And if you haven't seen it, it's something that's very interesting. This is actually I think, in response in particular to State Route 161 and Riverside Drive. But take a look at that if you haven't seen it. Utilizing law enforcement to help be your spokesperson, as well as your local newspaper. Having them help you tell the story that you want to tell about, about roundabouts or about a project, about the reason for the project and how perhaps the roundabout is solving the issues that you were trying to solve or enhancing the community in one way or another. And be honest about the things if there's trade-offs too. That's an important piece. Be very transparent about the entire process. I've got here visualization. Visualization, it speaks speaks a lot. It speaks to the community. It speaks to business owners. This happens to be, I'm actually have a visualization from this project. It's not the same exact one, but here's just a look. They use this in the public meeting. So what's the roundabout going to look like? You know, they have a retaining wall. You can see the river. You can see the bridge. It really makes it more real for folks that are having a hard time figuring out, how does this roundabout fit into my community? How does this roundabout fit into this particular project? This happened to be a project on U.S. Forest Service property. It also intersected a state highway, but it's an area that is protected, the environment is protected pretty heavily. So it was really important that the roundabout fit into the context of this community in this region. Okay, I'm going to go to the chat pod and then we're almost done. I'm going to start at the bottom here. Does FHWA have any publications documentation on turbo roundabouts? Okay, not yet. So that's something that I am working on in terms of turbo roundabouts. There are 2 state DOTs that are actively pursuing turbo roundabouts right now that I am aware of. Actually just had a meeting yesterday with one of those DOTs, and we are working with our international partners as well as working together to identify some of the things that we think are important as we look at turbo roundabouts in the United States. And so that, to be forthcoming, that is actually something that I'm hoping to be working on in the coming year in terms of getting some guidance. And from that perspective, it's really going to be using our international friends, as we did 20 years ago when we did our original guide, to help us be in a place where we can intelligently talk about turbo roundabouts. So good question, timely question. And Brandon, if you want to reach out to me, I can tell you, give you a status update on the other folks that are working on that. All right, so I'm just going to roll right into resources. This will go pretty quickly here. So if you weren't able to make it, and I know there was several people from Ohio that made it up to the TRB International Roundabout Conference in Green Bay in May, most of the presentations are online already. So teachamerica.com has always worked with TRB to record the sessions, so you can hear the speakers talk, you can watch the slides, but they actually have most of the information all the way back to the 2005 conference. I think not all the posters are up from 2017, but a great resource. They also have, for those of you that might also be working with alternative intersections and interchanges, DDIs, continuous flow intersections, and so on and so forth, they also do have that symposium recorded too, and that information is out there. A wonderful resource, and it has, again, dating back to the 2005, the first International Roundabout Conference. I also want to point you to, this is where I took that earlier map, the Kittleson Roundabout Inventory. This is the best data inventory that we have in the U.S. Again, it does not include every single roundabout in the U.S. They do include neighborhood traffic calming circles, rotaries, and other types of circles, but it is to the best of our ability. Now, if you know that you've got a roundabout in your community and it's not up there, there's a way for you to go, and so it can get added to the list. They just updated this prior to the May Roundabout Conference. Another thing I'm going to mention, some other states are pursuing is this intersection control evaluation policy or directive. So really it's a data-driven, performance-based framework to help us as practitioners identify an optimal investment or solution for intersections. California, Washington, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Indiana all have intersection control evaluation policies. Georgia, I think, was publishing theirs in June. Nevada should be publishing theirs shortly. And there's several other state DOTs that are looking to this to, again, be very transparent, as well as using these performance-based. So comparing operations to safety, to cost, to life cycle cost analysis, to the environment, all sorts of these metrics that we have, and looking at them together to ultimately make your decisions for. So if you're interested Victoria, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
For some reason you became detached from yourself here on the webinar, and I thought it was someone who'd called in. I muted them, and it was you.
Okay.
So I apologize. Yeah, we can hear
that's
you.
okay. Okay. So this is something, again, as you work with your partners, in the states, this has been a state DOT-driven process. However, we've heard from a lot of local agencies that have benefited from this process and are using it themselves to help make the best investment decisions, as well as communicate to the public why one alternative maybe is best versus another. And here's that list of the publications and research, so some of them dating back a little bit. Life cycle cost analysis of intersections. There's actually a spreadsheet tool that goes along with that tool, like I talked about with the performance metrics. Roundabouts on corridors. There's the synthesis roundabout practices that basically did a survey of all the state DOTs. I mentioned NCHRP 834, which was that accessibility of multi-lane roundabouts and channelized turn lanes. There is an ongoing study to update the crash, basically the safety performance functions, crash modification factors for roundabouts. That's NCHRP 1770. That's ongoing. I'm hoping that that's maybe done by the end of this year, beginning of next year, or published, I should say. And that would be information that would be updating, again, the safety performance functions and the crash modification factors that you would see in the Highway Safety Manual as they pertain to roundabouts. Mini roundabout safety and operational study, that is near completion and publication. It's actually just under review right now, where it's basically a study that looked at the before and after operations and safety of converting intersections, typically from two-way stop control and all-way stop to roundabouts. And then last but not least, I'm excited to let you know that NCHRP has approved the project to move forward with a third edition of the Roundabout Guide. So this would be taking all of this research that I just talked about and getting it into that one document again, which would be the third edition of the Roundabout Guide. So we'll basically replace NCHRP 672. And then here is the federal highways. We called it this TOPR 34 or TOPR 34. So I'm going to highlight a couple of them that came up. The information on accessibility, that was the first one there, that report. The link down below, again, if you Google Federal Highways, Office of Safety, Innovative Intersections, and you go into the roundabouts page, this will come up. The evaluation of fatal and severe injury crashes, that's the one that actually, that's the one, number 4 there, is the one that talks about all the fatal crashes that we've identified. It also has an in-depth look of Washington State and Wisconsin DOT in terms of their injury crashes. And then number 2, the reassessment of capacity models for Highway Capacity Manual. That actually publishes all the data that we used and all the locations that we used, collected data for the update to the capacity model for single lane and 2-lane roundabouts that now is published in HCM 6th edition. And then last but not least, some of you might know that the Ohio LTAP is sponsoring the one-day NHI roundabout training in September. The good news is that it's booked. The bad news is that it's booked if you haven't signed up for it. But I know that the LTAP Center does have a waiting list, and you know, it's possible that they may be able to host some additional sessions since those were so popular. And I'm going to mention one more thing. This is hot off the press, and you guys should get an email on this following this webinar. But the day following, so September 15th, that's a Friday, September 15th, Ohio DOT and LTAP and I believe Federal Highways will be sponsoring a one-day roundabout conference. And I'm going to let Victoria tell you what the details are, but it will be a one-day conference for you all to come together. There will be presentations, there'll be sessions, maybe there'll be some posters. I'm not sure exactly how Victoria's got it set up yet, but an exciting opportunity for you all to come together and to network and to learn from each other in terms of what's going on in Ohio and the things that you guys have learned throughout your your roundabouts there in Ohio. So last but not least, thank you for your time, for your questions, and I will check. I'm going to turn it over to Victoria, and if there's time for me to answer some of the additional questions in the chat pod, we'll certainly do that. If not, we can make sure my contact information is right there. We'll make sure that we can get some answers to you. So Victoria?
Hillary, thank you so much for the presentation today. We really appreciate it. And we did run a little over, so out of respect for everyone's time, I'm going to just forward you the questions that are in the chat pod, and we'll get back to them, hopefully with some answers in written form, since I have everybody's email address. But we appreciate your time on the webinar. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and please do look for follow-up emails. Have a good afternoon, everyone.